We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely incredible.
Oh yeah, dude. There's some Nephilim shit.
It's like we all know what's going down, but no one's saying shit what happened to the home of the brave. These motherfuckers, they controlling us now, and no one's talking about how they made us fight to be slaves. And everybody's just walking around, heading the clouds and wanna wake up to a dead in the grave. By then it's too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days. Everybody is slaves, only some are aware that the government releasing poison.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Nephilim Death Squad, the show where we hunt down and expose Nephilim shit. I am David Lee Corbo, aka The Raven. This is Top Lobster.
What's
and
up?
we are joined today by Chaz of the Dead.
And let me just
is
say,
really cool.
What's up?
I gotta
I like when
interrupt.
people have a title.
He's like, I wasn't sure. I didn't know who Chaz was. I've heard you on Tinfoil Hat, but we've never spoke in real life, or just even spoke over the internet. You booked this all through Corbo, which we're renaming you. And we play the intro, and I look down. I'm like, Chaz is fucking. He's in it. He's in it because that's exactly. That's how I feel when we start the show every single time. And so I was like, all right, this guy's the homie. This is gonna be a good episode. I feel it already.
Hell yeah, fire it up. I have an expression I like to use. My girlfriend hates it, but you know, when you fall off that horse, you get back on that horse and you fuck that horse. So let's fuck that horse tonight, boys.
That is an aggressive expression, and I'm all about it. You know what's funny is I did the microphone or the fucking headphone thing. I couldn't hear the intro. But
Are you serious?
Dude, I don't know what the fuck is. I gotta like take a plug out, move a plug around. But before we get into it, I want to address what's happening, and I'd like both Chaz and Top's thoughts on what it is that I'm going through on Twitter. I'm very excited because I finally developed a bit of conspiracy around myself, right? Around the Raven.
Yeah.
Now, that's how you know that you're doing something right when
Did you?
the masses start to speculate as to, what's going on. Is he a Freemason maybe? Is he initiated? Is he possibly gender inverted? And I am now like waist deep, dude, in the trenches, battling EGI people. For people who don't know, EGI is
it's incredible.
Gender inversion. It's fucking amazing, dude. And they have these. What they'll do is they'll take the concept is a lot of elites, which I guess makes me elite now, are gender inverted. One way or the other, whatever. And they'll take these skulls. This is a female skull. This is a male skull. They'll make them translucent and they'll Photoshop them over various celebrities' faces and see if the eye to jaw ratio, all this shit lines up. And that's how they're determining who is. And it turns out that your boy's got a female skull, according to the EGI folks, and they're coming for me.
I for one am convinced. I want to show me your mastectomy scars, you fucker. I'm not buying. I'm just kidding.
I know. I met him in real life, and I'm kind of like, is he? He sent me the picture, and I thought about it. I was like, he might be. I don't know.
It's
but
so
you know
outrageous.
what? I'm fucking insulted because listen, I'm just gonna go ahead and throw around some numbers here. I'm like 20,000 plus followers on Twitter. Corbo has 3,000, just barely. And he gets like 4 conspiracies. I saw the brick Masonic thing. They're like, was he Freemason? I was like,
baby.
he's a woman.
Yeah.
With the
See,
Raven.
it's not really about the size of the following. It's about pissing off the right groups of people.
I think that's what it is.
Fucking Twitter hates me, dude. There's not a single niche paranormal group out there that's not like, hey, fuck that guy. At some level. I'm a CIA op if you're a flat earther. If you're woke, I'm some kind of far right figurehead. It's great, man. I'm just doing me. Pisses people off. I think it's a sign of respect, actually.
For folks who don't know, the paranormal realm is actually from wherever you're standing, it's to the far right of you. Always, at all times. And so I can see that as being where you've landed. But
actually let me like, so to kind of put a bow on that, you're 100% right, because when I did the Elon Musk tweet with the adrenochrome or hate the Jays, they immediately called me far right for
Oh,
for making that sort of a joke instead of anti-Semitic, which was interesting. They went with that instead. I was like, huh. I don't know how
Well,
I feel
now
about
that one's getting thrown around so much nowadays that it's quickly losing any kind of meaning behind it, man. Like if you say just tweeting out the phrase "killing kids is bad" would label you an anti-Semite these days. Fucking Twitter, man.
It's a really weird game of hopscotch, right? Where like one block leads to another, and
Mhm.
it's very strange how ringing the bell and saying, "Hey, something might be happening to kids." Like I'm just noticing things. All right, there's a kind of an Italian cuisine thing associated with the blood of children thing, and then immediately that has a political leaning, which is amazing because in 2023, as well, you know, all the way back to 2019, 18, probably 16, as soon as Trump got in, you can't have any ideas without there being a political connotation to it. So let's take this moment real quick and introduce you, Chaz. Can you tell the people what sort of work you're into and where they can find it?
Yeah, so I do paranormal investigating, psychedelic experiments and research, and a little bit of occultism and all the stuff in between, kind of marrying the concepts. I do most of my writing these days for Paranormality Magazine. Go check those guys out. And then you can find me at Chaz of the Dead on most of the social media stuff, and then chazofthedead.com, where you can keep up with my books and articles and podcast appearances and all kinds of high strangeness and weird stuff. And then these depressing times, I try to keep it light, try to keep it having fun with it.
Hell yeah. Hey, has anything recently, like paranormal wise, in like the wide spectrum, kind of come to your radar? What's your most, what's your hot topic right now?
Nowadays, I still get a ton of UFO stuff because it's the hot topic. Every couple months, some government has something to say, and frankly, it's annoying because I've been doing it a while, and it's actually this whole modern disclosure thing is kind of comical because if people who have had their nose to the ground for a while, they know videos of UFOs have been produced specifically by the governments of France and Chile. They've been churning out UFO videos that are on par, if not more bizarre than the ones the US government has been releasing. And I still would love for us to circle back and like discuss those videos as a community, but clearly a kind of lobbying interest has formed here in the US, and they are definitely dictating a lot of this UFO stuff that's coming forward. And it fills my inbox. That being said, I'm willing to accept it because I've got a project I'm currently working on that's another alternative explanation to this UFO craze we're kind of experiencing. That's why I love doing this stuff. It never really gets boring because one day I'll wake up and I think it's all psychedelic. It's all part of our consciousness, the human experience. The next day I wake up and I'm like, nah, the government's built secret planes. That's what it is. That's what's going on. And then every once in a while, I'll really get into a story in a research hole, and I'll be like, aliens, it's aliens. I'm mostly off that these days, but still sneaks back up, and so it's never a boring day researching this kind of content. But I do think the whether it's just UFOs becoming more mainstream, or specifically of the topics I've written about in my previous books. The UFO stuff tends to find me, despite being Chaz of the Dead. Ghost hunters, man, they're a competitive bunch. They don't like to share shit. So they think I'm a hippie radical. They don't even like to include me most of the time. But I like to hang out around the edges and poke.
What's your view on the aliens? Or I guess we could talk about the UFOs, but if you are of the assumption that it's possible that maybe it is a extraterrestrial being, us on the Nephilim Death Squad, I'd say they're Nephilim. Other people think that they might just be interdimensional beings. Where you fall on that? Because they're showing us this for a reason, right? Like
Right.
eventually there's going to be something that happens with whatever's going on up there because they're keeping it in your peripheral constantly,
yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
What do you think?
And again, it's one of those things, the more the government talks about it, the less I am convinced it's aliens. Because again, the old assumption is absolutely accurate. The logical, and again, a lot of the logic used in paranormal is bullshit. We'll try to call it out as we go along here. But the old saying is that, you know, the reason they don't tell us about it is because it's aliens and they're powerless to do anything about it. Yeah, if there was actually aliens, that would probably check out. And again, they wouldn't tell us about it until like it became a scenario where there would be no kind of soft disclosure we're having right now, right? Because the minute we all find out, we'd be like, well, you guys suck. We're fucked. Yada, yada. The fact that they're kind of dipping their toe in and they're being like, yeah, maybe it's aliens. And, oh, look, bodies in Mexico. Oh, maybe that's alien. Alien. That makes it way more likely that they are using that as some kind of distraction, something to cover up an actual project. Now, the source of that actual project is what I've been working on, I believe to be something akin to a lot of paranormal activity, a type of energy that creates what many humans would call a paranormal experience. But it could also just be really fancy planes. And to kind of hammer this point home, I always like to bring up the book Mirage Men. There's the movie, it's not as good, but the book goes into this one known fact of a story that in the early days of like the F-16 early fighter jets, when they were just rolling them out, they'd make the pilots wear like gorilla suits and like monkey costumes from like Hollywood movies. And they would intentionally then fly the planes real close to passenger jets to see what the pilots, the commercial pilots, how they would react. And of course, it worked. The pilots were like, man, I saw a plane that I've never seen before, and a fucking monkey was flying it. Like, you will never believe this shit.
Was
and
it Spirit Airlines?
That's probably the origins of Spirit Airlines. That program went on to be.
That's fucked up.
But yeah, no. And so, again, I think when you really, and then when you sit back and you honestly examine a lot of these quote unquote whistleblowers, you kind of find traces of that throughout their testimony. Not so much this Grush guy. He doesn't really have anything to say. I mean, he's just parroting what's been in the literature for 20 years. He's got no witnesses or sources. It's just like, yeah, I worked it. I literally have a buddy I talk to, I play video games every once in a while, who works for the NSA, and he's told me the exact same shit. I've seen some fucking weird ass videos. I don't know what any of it means, but there's something out there for sure.
Hey, what do you make of the Las Vegas sighting? That one.
So that stuff. So this is kind of where I delineate a little bit. So that stuff kind of it's hard because it falls right in Vegas, which leads you to believe it has some, it's on the outsides of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's got, Area 51. It's got the legends associated with it. But it also has that aspect of high strangeness. And so that's what I kind of look for when I'm looking at, is something really, truly paranormal, is something happening that is nonsensical. That's almost my mark to look for. Because if a story sounds like a Hollywood movie, it's a Hollywood movie. Someone scripted it and something's not right. But when someone comes to me and the story is something of bewilderment, it's baffling, something totally unexplainable, then that's when I kind of get my interest piqued a little bit. And so those humanoid sightings in Vegas, they have some of that aspect to it. And again, this is where it gets a little bit blurry, where it could be this, what I passionately call B theory. It could be a craft that's operations cause what we would call nowadays psychedelic side effects. And these people saw a legitimate craft, and then they were tripping a little bit and got like freaked out and saw some weird shit. I think similar things are occurring in Brazil,
right? Like,
sorry, go ahead.
No, every time people are seeing a craft, it is very possible that they could also be reacting to whatever it is. If you think about, I don't know, I forget the guy's name that had the he was working on the reverse engineering of this stuff.
Oh,
and
Bob Lazar.
Bob Lazar, and he's describing like it's like sucking you into gravity. You know, if something was around you, you would very likely be not in your normal state of mind. You would probably be vibrating strangely. So like just that thing being whatever it is, and then your account of it, I mean, who knows what's really happening?
Yeah. Well, again, Lazar's story is actually one of those I think really encapsulates the whole conundrum, because, you know, the strangest part was that he said he saw a little gray dude in an office, and he was like quickly shut it away. And when he tells that story, most times he says it could have been a guy in a suit. Like, I only saw it for a minute. It was like really weird, and that could have been some
that he
kind
was
of
made to see.
Right. It could have been some kind of staged theater. Like they wanted him to see that. But then he also goes on to tell stories about how like one of the UFOs was ancient and we dug it out of a archaeological site, and then another one was, you know, like a fancier one that had crashed. So even though he shares that skepticism, his story heavily implies the extraterrestrial hypothesis, right? Ancient aliens. He hits all the marks, which is why he's so intriguing. But I think him, David Grush, there's another alternate reality there that needs to be explored. The idea that perhaps these are just retirement programs. When you retire from doing some top secret stuff, they're like, hey, we'll up your pension if you hold on one second. Sorry about that. So it could be a simple, they up their pension, they you know, get a retirement degree, go out, say some crazy UFO shit every few years. And this fact is reimbursed by, if you look at the camp of, who's the C5, Dr. Greer. I don't know if you guys ever go into Dr. Stephen Greer.
He's a little strange to me.
He's very strange. His whole meditated UFO thing, honestly, there's some stuff to that. But his whole...
I've heard that from a lot of people, that you can almost summon them, which, you know...
You ever see that video on like some like random news channel? Some dude's like, yeah, I'm going to summon a UFO, and then he does it.
And he does it. Yeah, he does it. And he's
so, again,
I don't know what the hell that is. That's very bizarre.
I've experienced similar things under psychedelics and similar meditation practices. You can absolutely get some light orbs to show up and do some weird shit. But where his gets a little weird is, again, the extraterrestrial bit, where he insists all the aliens are good guys and that the government's evil, and we got to trust these entities, and I will be the UFO messiah.
Do you remember the Galactic Federation of Light? They were kind of I think they probably still are operating, but they were heavily on YouTube. And man, we're going back to like 2009, and it was this Siri voice. Every time I say this story, I have to check my phone to make sure it doesn't light up when I say that. But this, you know, AI voice, this woman's voice, and she's basically saying that she empathizes with the plight of humanity, that humanity is under rule by, you know, dark entities and evil dictator-esque political figures, and that essentially we're meant to ascend soon and take our place amongst the galactic family. And they would always refer to people as dear ones. That's how they would refer to people. And
it's that Hollywood movie thing, though, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that was, you know, it was one of those things where whatever people think about QAnon, it's this idea that like there's going to be an intervention from a savior force, right? Because they would always say like trust in us, trust in the plan. It was the same
Oh
thing
yeah.
that Anonymous was doing on the internet back in like 2007, 8, 9, 2010 was this like expect us. We're going to be here. We're going to intervene. We're going to save you. It's weird how we've been inundated with that kind of crap endlessly for the past decade,
Well,
15 years.
if you count
And
the church, it's been thousands of years.
yeah, true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. But one of the things you're talking about right now that's really interesting to me is like
Well,
we're in this weird
let me say
moment
something.
where all these
The
Go ahead.
church, because the church has been saying that for thousands of years, someone is going to save you, and like the perfect antichrist message would be exactly that. It's almost like
Yeah.
just about anything that if you look at what Satan or Lucifer would do, it would be like the exact inversion of Christ or God, like a
right,
perversion
like a mirror
of it.
or
Yeah.
an imitation.
Yeah, like a funny mirror. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like that follows.
Well,
And
I actually just finished reading a great book. It's a little dated, but it's pretty good. It's missing some more frequent news on the Antichrist, but it's called "Naming the Antichrist: Uncovering an American Obsession." I can't remember the academic who wrote it, but it's pretty good, and it just dives into specifically, the history of the Antichrist in the Americas and being based in Protestantism and these real niche sects. We've been picking antichrists from the beginning, and it's always been the live your simple humble life and Jesus will come and save you from the baddies. And again, believe whatever you want to believe, peace, love, and happiness at the end of the day. But when it comes to applying that metric to any of the paranormal subjects, whether it's ghosts, UFOs, even government disclosure, it ends up just mucking up the works. It is not a effective model of study when it comes to these subjects.
here's an example of the sort of mucking up. Right now we're in the cusp of this big moment, right? The Vegas issue, Chile, Peru, and the fucking face peelers, right? The Mexico rolling out the sort of sandcastle alien corpses.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like
Load of
every
shit, by the
other
way.
day. I would say, yeah, I didn't believe this. Like, they look like, remember when somebody made cake out of one of them? It looked just
Well,
like it.
The
They
the
commit to
issue
it.
is that those mummies aren't new. I saw those mummies 6 years ago. They've been touting those mummies for a minute, and they
I
were
thought they were
laughed
like
off.
fucking made of dirt.
They were laughed off when they were first presented at like a UFO conference, and like the story of how this dude scammed his way into like being in front of the Congress is actually quite hilarious. he's
Somebody,
a known fraudster.
yeah, I've heard the same thing actually. And
Here's
just
the
for
thing.
somebody in the chat, somebody named Tio said face peelers, and it's just like, yeah, look into it. In Peru, there was a string of alien sightings by local people. I think it was maybe more tribal people
Oh
that
yeah,
were
in the Amazon.
apparently having interactions with these entities that seemed to hover like 3 meters off the ground, and they had a hankering for like face meat, and they were peeling
And
people's faces off surgically, allegedly.
the government's explanation that it was illegal gold miners using
Yeah.
jetpacks, which is fucking badass. But it's again pretty Hollywood movie, and so I think actually those cases, the Vegas case, these face peeler cases, they serve as a good example of what might be a
Bullshit.
a craft, some kind of device that's using non-traditional propulsion, and
Right.
being near this non-traditional propulsion fucks you up a little bit, and it leads to these essentially near psychedelic experiences. And
Or
so
it
that
could
gets
be
into
like
this.
a human in a suit or an actual piece of technology, but it's so grandiose in nature, and then coupled with the experience of whatever the propulsion is screwing you up, and it's kind of making something that already is a big deal go levels beyond. And maybe there's somebody, I mean, obviously there's somebody who's counting on that, right? Whoever the hell is flying these ships, whatever government has a vested interest in making, I don't know, disclosure at the forefront, whether it's a distraction for like the Hunter Biden laptop. Every time Hunter Biden gets popped for like touching kids, another alien thing drops at the same fucking time.
So let's put our tinfoil hats on, nice
Oh
and
yeah.
snugly here,
Oh, they've been
because
on. I know. I just saw Top look for his. He physically
I
has
have
one.
one. Yeah, it's not in this room.
because I've got a story to tell. And this goes back 8 or so years to Morocco, where I was backpacking around. At the time, I was just writing for like a personal like WordPress blog, paranormal stuff. But as I was getting into it, asking around, looking into local legends, someone I was hanging out with was like, I got a dude you need to talk to. And I remember it. We were on a balcony taking hashish gravity bongs. And this dude was like, he's totally insane, but like, he's got a fucking great ass story to tell. Like, you got to meet this guy. And so we set up this meeting. I meet him in this roadside cafe. And this dude tells me about how his dad worked for the CIA. And this is outside of Tangier, which history buffs might know some of the international zone history there. It was the capital of spycraft for a while. But he he said his dad worked for the CIA and that, he lived here off of those proceeds, and that he knew plenty of people who flew UFOs. And in a really matter-of-fact way, he was like, yeah, they reverse engineered an anti-gravity chamber in like the thorax of honeybees, I think it is. And they use that same concept, and that's how UFOs work. And he was like, yeah, I could get you a ride on one. Really totally casually. So much so that I was like, this guy's full of shit. Right? Immediately, I'm like, no fucking way. Whatever. And I did meet him a second time at his home in Tangier, and there was some weird stuff. Like, it was a home that absolutely was beyond the means of a normal like it was weird. His neighbor was the Spanish princess. Like, it was bizarre. He had some assets that made no sense for an unemployed dude just hanging out.
And so wait, what was, to go back to that for a second? They engineered an anti-gravity chamber in the thorax of a bee? Is that what
So
you
they
said?
discovered it in the thorax of the bee, and they used that, is what he said. They reverse engineered this concept and built craft
That is
that fly on it.
interesting. That's not the first time that I've heard that, actually. Top, weren't we just learning something somewhere about this, the properties of certain insects, and sort of like the patterns on their shells, or all these different things, and
Yeah, Justin.
that was it. Yeah, that's right. It was Justin from Cryptids of the Corn, and he was saying that basically there's a weight discrepancy where these insects shouldn't be able to experience lift and flight in comparison to the weight of them and the size of their wings and things of that nature, and that there's something else in effect there. That's really interesting. An anti-gravity chamber within
he was saying it's like
thorax of a bee.
The rabbit hole gets deeper.
Yeah. He was saying it's a frequency thing or an acoustic thing with their shell and how they're vibrating in a certain way. It was going towards that.
I know exactly. That's where all the research kind of puddles out. And the myth that honeybees are too heavy to fly has been around for a couple decades. No one knows exactly where it came from, but the story's always told like it's MIT or Princeton or whatever, and some mathematicians are hanging out, and one day they just are being geniuses, and they're like, let's do the math of honeybee flight, and they figured out it doesn't work. Their wings are too small. And that's true. It doesn't work in the traditional flight sense. Now, the explanation is that they use a special whirlwind pattern. They have these extra muscles in their back, and that gives them this extra lift that they need. That being said, there is still a mystery specifically with honeybees, because they have this thing that researchers call the economy mode. And that's when they're carrying pollen, they're actually using less energy. They're breathing slower, they're flapping slower. And this goes against all known aerodynamics. It's still this weird mystery. So it's kind of one of these myths that's half true, half, pop culture. I think it's at the beginning of the Jerry Seinfeld Bee movie. It says,
I was just gonna say, like, it's another like in plain sight sort of thing. Like if they are doing this, it's like, here, fucking Jerry, go make this dumb movie, and I've watched it 100 times. In the very beginning, you're right, it does say is like we're not supposed to be able to fly, yet we do, and it's like the rest of the movie is just glorifying the bee colony. Like it's very strange if you think about it from this lens.
It is an interesting concept. So, and there's also really other in regards to the shells having interesting color and properties. There's a lot of good research into that in regards to scarab beetles. That's going to tie back in here in a minute. There's really a lot of bizarre aspects about heavy flying insects, but it's not really considered like that big of a mystery. It's kind of overinflated a bit, and it always comes up with these kind of things about frequency and stuff, and that's close. But I think we tapped on to something a little stranger. Again, now buckle your tinfoil hat down.
Something a little stranger than what we just said.
Super glue it down, because this is where it gets weird. So after doing all the scientific research into it, and this was after, by the way, I had put that on the back burner for years, and I had mentioned it only briefly in a paragraph in my first book when I was talking about the UFO and Nazi connection. And specifically the bell, this idea that the Nazis had designed a flying machine in that bell, which historians say was a nuclear centrifuge, but conspiracy theorists say it was a UFO anti-gravity generator. It kind of looks like a bee's ass if you flip it upside down, I said. And I was like, I met a crazy guy who told me it was bees. So maybe if it is just bees, the Nazis could have figured that out. Why not? And a couple of years later, I was doing a podcast with a guy who had read the book and was like, that paragraph jumped out at me, because my best friend, when I was growing up, his dad worked for the military. He was not allowed to tell us anything about what he did specifically. He would only tell the kids when they were kids, I'm a man in black, like in the movies. That's all he would tell them. And so they know he had something to do with like UFOs and aliens and things. And when this guy was on his deathbed, which was early, it's going to loop back in too. They asked him, well, like, what can you tell us anything about like the UFOs? Like what can you tell us? Tell us something. And all he would say was, look at the bees, look at the bees. And so, yeah, I'm getting to that guy, dude. Victor Gravinikov. Thank you, YouTube commenter. If you're not watching the live shows, listeners,
he knows.
Shout out.
He's
Shout out to conspiracy
hell
extremists.
yeah, Victor Gravinikov. So that's where this
Fun fact, Chaz, I've actually seen this guy's dick. This guy here.
I'm sure it's impressive. Covered in beetle exoskeletons. Most effective birth control. So Victor Gravinikov was a Russian entomologist. And so this is where I started doing some bizarre research. And the research itself was strange because the guy uncovering it, he was doing this all in the early 2000s. He ran a website called KeelyNet, and he went just dark one day on the internet, vanished. All the social media stopped. The website got shut down. No word from it. And like his dead Twitter page can still be like found. I don't know, maybe not since they X'd it. But this KeelyNet guy was obsessed with all kinds of free energy research. Anyone who claimed to have built some kind of anti-gravity device, or like the Brazilian dude who said he made a combustion engine using salt water instead of gas. The namesake of the website, Keely, was a dude from the 1800s who said he discovered this magical air fluid. And after he died, they said, oh, he was just using compressed air to like fake all of this shit. He was full of it because he had all these pipes running through. He might not have been full of it. Anyways. And the last thing he was working on was he was working with the son of Victor Gravinikov to get translations of Grabinikov's memoirs. And even though this website went down, his memoir can still be found. It's in Russian, but you can get some rough translations of it done. And I've had a couple Russian friends actually help me with some of the more specific bits in like translating it. And it's the memoirs of an entomologist, of a bug scientist, except for chapter 13, where he's like, oh yeah, and one time I built a UFO. Really bizarre.
Wait a second. How exciting does this dude find bugs that he only dedicates one fucking chapter to the UFO he invented, and the rest of the chapters are still about
dude,
bugs?
exactly. He's just talking about the beauty of nature and
they're like they're like
yeah.
they love animals so much, but they're like I texted Justin last night. I was like, have you ever seen this hairy frog? And he was like, yeah, it was kind of like brought up, and then he told me a story about it. I was like, fucking this guy, you just know that? Like off the top of your head? It's just crazy. He's the type of dude that if he created a UFO, he'd be like, yeah, but we're going to talk about this kind of, rare cryptid.
Like, but did you know about the wild Madagascar snail? It has the largest shell known to man. We're like, dude, you made a UFO. Yeah. But this shell, though.
No, that was, and it's funny you noticed that detail, because on the projects I'm working on, that's something that pops up again and again with these scientists who have some of the better claims of building this similar technology. One, them being a naturalist, not related to propulsion in any way. They come out a total left field, different field, and come up with some kind of bizarre propulsion or similar-esque device. Two, those devices, while they have some kind of weird UFO connection or whatever, these dudes almost always insist their main benefit is medicinal. Gorbachev is the same, but he built a bunch of devices using the same principle. They're in a museum in like a university in Siberia. And I actually had like planned to go there a few years back, like pre-Ukraine war. That's how long I've been working on the project. And basically just had to put a kibosh on that whole, it was going to be a whole thing, and I was going to focus purely on Gorbachev. And so because of the war, I've had to spread out my research into different avenues. But I found literally endless piles of research of similar guys with similar stories. But Gorbachev's story is that, he's a bug guy. One day he's looking at bug samples under a microscope, specifically these wing covers. And interestingly, he says in the book that he doesn't want to tell you what bug it was because he feared that people would harvest them too much and the population would already decline from what it is now. He implied in the 90s the population of this bug had been falling, and if he revealed it, he worried it would go extinct from people trying to recreate his research.
Do you think there's any overlap with that and the fact that like bees are kind of like disappearing?
So again, tinfoil hats secure. Coincidence is not causation, whatever, blah, blah. But if you do look at a graph of bee populations and put one of UFO sightings, they are an X, dude. UFO sightings go up and bee populations drop consistently over the years.
This is the fucking idea that the government is mass murdering bees. We thought it was so that they can control like the crops and shit. They're like, no, bitch, we're making flying shit.
A vital part of anti-gravity technology is with insect shells. Yep, that's pretty much this concept. And so Gorbachev was looking at these shells under a microscope, and he noticed they would hover a little bit before they like come to rest. And he kept trying it, thought it was maybe static electricity or whatever. And eventually he came up with the idea to stitch a bunch of them together, like with copper cord and shit, wired them into like a sheet, and then eventually folded these sheets into these boxes. And supposedly this box, you would touch it, and there's video out there. We can't say how legit the video is. It's fucking grainy as shit. It could be, who knows. But there's supposed video of this. And he taps it and kind of flies up to the ceiling and then kind of like floats gingerly down like a balloon. This kind of box the size of a brick. And then he did the next logical thing, and he strapped a bunch of these boxes together on the bottom of what is essentially a pallet, like a wooden pallet. Slapped some handlebars on that bitch and created this flying craft. And so
I've seen that shit. I've seen fucking, is there videos of it?
There's a photo of him supposedly on it, And there is a video of a dude flying a weird thing, but that is actually miscredited as Gorbachev. That video is from a military infantry test from like the 1980s or whatever.
Yeah, I remember it being associated with the military. Those motherfuckers got me. Is that what you
that
said?
so that one, every time I see a Gorbachev video, dude, talk about controlled fucking narrative. Every time I see a Gorbachev video, that's been inserted, even though it's plain easy to trace that comes from this 1980s. It uses helicopter. It's a helicopter. It's like the drones they use now. It's just the dude standing on one of those. It's
motherfucker, dude. I thought I saw some cool shit.
But it's always attributed to Gorbachev, which again rings a little bit of an alarm bell in my mind every time. It's interesting.
Just a small discrediting, right? Like,
yeah, because
so that the only thing associated with it can be like, no, that's not it.
Yeah, because so once you look into that aspect, yeah, well, that's fake. They must be faking the rest of it. It's probably, and then again, the photos, the supposed real photos of him are not impressive. It's a guy on a thing, and then it's like the thing hovering a little bit. He very well could have just jumped, like held
it's like on an old school Segway. Like
yeah, it's kind of like those Enfield poltergeist photos where it's like the girls being thrown, but they're just hovering. They're like hovering over their bed. They could have just jumped, you know? Yeah. But supposedly this craft was incapable of incredible flight. It could fly up, down, all around, and go very incredible speeds, though he did not take it that fast because, again, it was just the pallet and handlebars. Like he would only kind of take it slightly. And he believed that it created this kind of independent bubble around it that was able to travel without any kind of friction. And so that's why friction from gravity, friction from air, friction from anything. It was just frictionless travel in this bubble created by the mass of insect shells, presumably. What got interesting, though, because at this point, I'm like, all right, this is pretty fucking crazy. Like it sounds pretty nonsensical, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's out there. The thing that kind of perked my attention was he rattled off the side effects of operating this craft. And it was almost a mirror image of the side effects I wrote in my first book, comparing the psychedelic experience to the paranormal experience. So he said, most interestingly, when he took the first flight around his little university town in remote Siberia, they next day people had obviously seen him flying about, but no one said they saw a Russian scientist, flying a pallet thing. They said that they saw these glowing discs in the sky, and they followed the same flight patterns he did, and all this. And he noted throughout rest of the travels, anytime someone looked up, they would see these glowing geometric shapes, triangles, discs, tubes. He rattled off the UFO shapes.
Am I to understand that there's correlating eyewitness testimony to go along with this guy's claiming to have flown his fucking pallet through the air?
So, according to his son and his own writings, because again, those corroborating witnesses are Siberian peasants, and so
we can't listen to them. They don't count.
Well, hey man, I was willing to go out there and like ask them, because there are physical traits. This dude was real. He was absolutely 100% a real person. He worked at a university.
This wasn't that long ago, so this would still be something that's in the
I plan to go out there and ask about it, despite being almost potentially thrown in a gulag over it, because it's the same thing I did in Chile. I went down to find this friendship group. I love going to these places, especially when they tell me I can't or shouldn't.
I'd suggest you hold off until like the Ukraine war is over.
Oh yeah, dude, I'm rooting for those guys. Take it over, I say. What was the mercenary guy? I was his number one fucking proponent, man. I was like, take him over. He'll just charge you money to get in, I'm sure. It'll be fucking great.
That is true. Yeah, then it's a pay to play state, and you just get in there with enough cash. Yeah, I never thought
it's
about
a lot
like
less
that.
convoluted. You at least you know what the fuck's up.
No, hey. It was worth a shot. Rest in peace, mercenary drug lord or whatever fucking this deal was.
The Wagner group, wasn't it?
Yeah. Horrible criminals, I'm sure all of them. But, each their own.
Oh shit! So
You do
these
you, boo.
people they see what looks like a disc instead of a palette, and this is reminding me of what you were suggesting before, right? Where it's like whatever this propulsion source is, it may create some sort of hallucinogenic distortion amongst the people
Exactly.
who are witnessing it.
And so that is what he also noted, is that when he would land the craft in the same place over and over again, that place would start having paranormal activity, lots of poltergeist activities, weird bangs, weird noises, lots of strange interactions, things moving on their own. When Interestingly, when he would drop something off the side of the craft while in flight, it would disappear. It wouldn't fall straight down to the ground. It would disappear. And on one instance, he did so over an apartment building. And that apartment building started to have weird paranormal activity. Specifically, there were a lot of tiny little burnt holes, perfectly round, melted holes in people's windows. And on one instance, he found a test tube that he had dropped was fused into the glass of one of these windows, which again lines up with a lot of paranormal cases. The Philadelphia experiment supposedly had a bunch of weird teleportations and fusings. But interestingly, the little holes in the window is a super niche detail a lot of people would overlook, but that occurred in the Mothman cases a lot. John Keel noticed that a lot of the houses where the Mothman had flown over had these similar little holes in their window, and he just was totally perplexed by them.
That's really strange. That reminds me of within the 9/11 truther community, there are some people who believe that there was a hurricane off the coast of New York City at the time of the planes, and that there is a strange thing with storms and electromagnetic disturbances that like breaks structures down on a molecular level and allows for things that shouldn't be able to be in another thing. For example, like in tornadoes and such, there are these images of like pieces of straw driven through like metal siding in houses and shit, and it doesn't make sense that something that's not
It's like
as rigid would be able to fucking go through it. But the explanation there is supposedly that there is an electromagnetic disturbance generated by this storm, and it's literally breaking things down on a molecular level. It's making them sort of unsteady for a period of time, and it allows for things to pass through under the right circumstances.
if you
And
look at
so,
like the simulation theory, I know I'm not as big of a fan of it as I was before, but if you kind of overload a computer and kind of run it at like high capacity, which a natural disaster would be, or some of these like large events, yeah, maybe shit gets fucked up for a quick second, and we're like, well, now I'm a piece of glass stuck in a test tube stuck in a glass.
Your example of the tornado, I think, is quite poignant, because that seems to be again. So in popular literature, paranormal conspiracy stuff, this always is attributed to frequencies. That's the new age buzzword we like to put. It must vibrate and it must register at a certain frequency. And I kept
I'm
coming
the
up
frequency
against.
guy.
Well, you're not necessarily wrong. I think frequency is one of the factors, as well as vortices, because that keeps popping up, not only with the bees, but with one of the other German scientists who happened to work on the Bell Project, was really into vortices, and seemed to discover something similar to Gorbachev. But quickly, before we get into that weird shit, the wrap up Gorbachev story was that he was operating these craft. Oh, and my favorite other detail, again, he could have made this all up. He might have read a Russian copy of Mothman Prophecies and like really picked out these super niche details. It's possible, but I was getting more and more convinced. The most interesting bit was that he put a larva. No, it was a fully grown insect. I always mix it up when I tell this story, but I believe it was a fully grown insect into one of these test tubes, put it in his pocket, flew back to his lab when he, like an hour or so, hour and a half back to his lab.
and
because
this
he didn't
created
wanna
the
go
first fucking
too fast.
insectoid. The first fucking.
Not quite, but something equally bizarre. He pulled it out, and the fully grown insect was now in a larval state. It had regressed back in time, essentially. And so, after using this thing for a while, he noted a couple things. That one, a bunch of weird shit was happening. So, like, if it did that to a bug, what is it doing to my organs? Like when I'm flying around using this thing. But also, again, that one guy who died early from being a Men in Black. Interesting. But he also said that UFOs were being seen all over the globe while he was doing this. Like he was clearly aware that people were also seeing glowing discs in, the US and South America. And he quickly determined that, well, someone else has discovered this and they're not going public with it. They're not talking about it. He lived lived through the fall of the Soviet Union. And so he was like, I'm not telling fuck all. Like I'll write a chapter in my memoirs on my deathbed, but I'm putting this thing up. Like I'm not using it because it will only lead to trouble for me and my family. And a reasonable conclusion. He supposedly folded it up and put it away, and it's somewhere in Siberia, that flying fucking pallet UFO. And again, Keeley was in touch with
that you would. It's not gonna bring you anything good. I mean, genuinely, like if I'm just trying to, kind of brainstorm myself, like if I were to do something like that in my garage, and all of a sudden my joy of like, wow, look at the thing that I did. This is incredible. Would immediately be eclipsed by like, shit, this is not gonna. Did my neighbors see that? Everybody's got Ring cameras. Fuck, dude.
The CIA is gonna
shut
shoot
my
me
door
in the chest.
Exactly. Yeah. So you really can't. We can't have fucking anything nice.
Mm-mm. So
that's incredible.
This again, incredible story. But it was I kind of ran up into that same wall. Well, okay, if this is the technology, then I've got the same issue Gorbachev come up against, where there is a wall where people aren't going public with it. But that doesn't mean you can't trace the steps of this, like any other scientific process. And in my new writing project, I compare it in the introduction to the Manhattan Project, where every time that story is told, it's told with this this gusto about how it was such a top secret project and no one knew we were doing it and how far along we were and da 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 da. And that latter part was true. No one knew like how far along or what exactly the end goal was. They knew it was a weapon, but the guesses ranged. But there were plenty of people to guess, because if you were in a nuclear physics class at the time, your professor was just fucking gone. You know what I mean? Like if you were in any of the top universities in any of the Western allies, you would have noticed that, the PhD candidate, the Nobel laureate, all those guys are missing. They usually work here. Where are they? I don't know. Their mails being forwarded to Nevada. Like, oh, well, Americans must be working on something, huh? Like it was a clear conclusion for anyone who was looking directly. And I think they learned from that lesson by making sure that these people don't even enter the academic field at any level. They poach them real early and real quick. And there's been a lot of people in modern times, like the last few decades, who have come up with similar technologies, and then their company just disappears. Can't find them on LinkedIn anymore. They're just gone. And it's like, well, I wonder what happened to that. Those guys are either at the bottom of the ocean or they're fucking millionaires in an island somewhere for pawning off their latest upgrade to this potentially UFO technology. And then that's where
I just want to say
go ahead.
That I don't want to derail you, but I do want you to keep in mind, my next question is got to be, if not just government operations, what else? But please continue. But you got to know that that's where we're going next.
Oh yeah. Well, to expand on that, the this kind of research and looking into that, I kind of again kept hitting against that wall, whether it was frequency or chi or whatever. This kind of became this like new age catch-all when I tried to do further research past these people's lives. Wilhelm Reich's a good example of that. I don't know if you guys are familiar with orgone and orgone energy. That's a huge rabbit hole. I'm sure you can. I'll find someone to recommend to have on the show for that one.
Okay.
Probably will do it a little more justice than I will. But Wilhelm Reich studied under Freud. He was in the same class as Carl Jung. They were colleagues. His whole thing was about sexual potency and like the orgasm and how like it can be used as a healing force. And eventually, to yada yada through this, he built big old orgone accumulators, which people would sit in and it would cure them of diseases, even cancers, he would claim. And he also built a thing he called the Cloudbuster, which could create rainstorms or dissipate rainstorms. And he found an interesting third use, could be used to shoot down UFOs. And so it's really interesting. But again, a little of that controlled illusionment. If you go into any kind of new age crystal shop these days, you can buy an orgone accumulator. You'll see them. They're little resin pyramids with like copper dust and crystals and a bunch of shit in them, which have absolutely nothing to do with Reich's work. And we know that because there's pictures of what the old orgone accumulators look like. But we don't know much more beyond that because his story ends in one of the sadder ways these stories ends. Instead of just disappearing, he gets Tesla'd, where he is actually arrested directly by the ATF. He's put into prison for selling false medical equipment, which again is neither alcohol, tobacco, or firearms. So it's totally like a weird operation from the get. All of his writings and books in his like research compound, Organon, which is in Maine, you can go and see it. It's still a museum to his work. All of his writings and research are confiscated and a few days later are burned in New York. Thousands and thousands of pages of documents, all torched. So none of his research continued, none of it. And he died a few months later in prison. And so, again, I think he was probably onto something. It's like, all right, yeah, it sounds crazy. He could have been a kook. But then why do you not just let an old kook die an old kook? Why do you kill him in prison? Why do you burn all of his research?
Why
Shit is fucking
why do you
crazy.
burn it? Because if you're burning it, that means like they already know, right?
Exactly.
So
that was the interesting part, because this was, again, the 80s. And by that time, pretty sure the UFOs he was shooting down were government UFOs. I think those were already. So when they got
Holy
this.
shit. And this regular fucking dude figured out how to shoot them down.
Shoot him down by accident. And so they fucking came in, threw him in prison, and fucking burned all of his shit.
They probably like charged him with murder. If there's like government employees just flying and he just killed Bill or something. Bill was on his lunch break.
The interesting part is he became super paranoid. He was convinced they were aliens, and he was constantly talking to the Air Force base nearby and being like, help me out. He said they sent fighter jets on one occasion. Like, he was in constant congress with them. And it seems like through his writings, the ones that we have, through his son and a couple of his ex-wives, notorious poon hound, this guy. Big surprise from the orgasm potency, dude. He was fucking everybody's wives. But other than that, he seemed to be a pretty good scientist. But his wives and his wives and children wrote these, their versions of the story. And it seems from their accounts that the Air Force was constantly goading him on, like they were fucking with him. And so, again, I think it's one of these parts of these stories that is a consistent factor.
They had over-under bets on how many fucking UFOs he was going to be able to take down that week.
Absolutely.
So they were trying to bump those numbers up.
Hey, man, they got to kill cows. They got to probe anuses.
That's it. And this seems
they've got to fucking kill some mad scientists.
That all seems very much governmental, and I can get behind that, right? There's always like
Oh
a
yeah.
military scientific angle to those things. But then there is, I mean, before when we were discussing um how 1 minute you'll go to this is all kind of a psychedelic experience, and then maybe the next
Mhm.
something will happen. You'll go, no, this is actually aliens. I'm of the school of thought where it's a wide variety of things,
Mhm.
and one of the greatest examples of that I've heard recently was Justin of Cryptids of the Corn saying that he believes a very small percentage of these things are actually organic beings,
Yeah, I
like
love that one.
fucking upper
Mhm.
atmospheric fungi. Fantastic episode, awesome. I
Crazy.
recommend. Yeah, I recommend people go check out Cryptids of the Corn. But I would like to get your thoughts on like, well, what else do you think it is? Is there a way we can move away from the nuts and bolts aspects of things? Is there any room in your mind for something that is much more paranormal, less tangible in nature than maybe a mad scientist's palette machine?
Well,
Oh
what
yeah.
we're asking is, were the Nazis talking with entities?
Yes, because
Ooh.
I just fucking watched Hellboy, and I want to say that, man, I haven't seen the first two Hellboy films in so long, and the
They're
first
great,
Hellboy
man.
film is fucking awesome, dude.
They're
Like, it's so
badass,
good.
dude. Hell yeah.
Dude, they
I gotta
really
watch
were.
it.
We don't make movies like, dude, I'm telling you, you have to watch Hellboy, the fucking Ron
Mhm.
Perlman. As much as he sucks, that fucking movie is phenomenal. And the whole thing, for the audience, spoiler alert, motherfuckers. In the beginning, they're infiltrating a sort of a Nazi regime who's in the
Yeah, if
middle
you haven't
of
seen
some sort of a cult.
2004's Hellboy, spoiler alert.
Spoiler, sign off
Sorry,
now.
guys. I know it's still fucking fresh, but they infiltrate this Nazi. It's not really the Nazis in the movie, but they are the Nazis. It's a placeholder, and they're doing like an occult ritual in a rainstorm, and they're trying to summon in to this realm. They're trying to open a portal, and they're trying to bring in some sort of entities into this realm, and one thing leads to another, and it gets shut. But not before Hellboy comes through as a baby, quite an adorable, bad CGI baby. But
Hey,
so there's
Chaz,
this.
do you think that these UFOs are possibly creating portals around them?
So yeah, I think that's where this all kind of blends together. That's why this has been the theory I've paid a lot of attention to recently, is because it's the first one, and everyone tries to sell their universal paranormal theory. They're most bullshit. And I'll be honest, there's plenty of holes. There are plenty of holes to be poked in my B theory. But this is the first one where I've seen it get that close to covering these things. And so I really think that the let's explore this B theory a little bit if we're taking it as is. That operating these crafts create essentially zones of, we'll call it time space fluctuation, but weird spooky shit in layman's terms. Then I think you can actually find a very interesting paper trail to a lot of quote unquote paranormal locations. Let's take the famous Skinwalker Ranch, which we know was, again, a lot of high strangeness happening out there, according to the previous owners. It was then purchased by Robert Bigelow, who, of course, makes most of his money in the aerospace industry. So perhaps if this technology is as it is, then I'm sure corporations have it just as well as governments. It's not that complex. It's literally bug parts jammed into a fucking pallet. So anyone can build it.
I hope there's duct tape involved. I'd be very upset. No duct tape.
Theoretically, not that complex. I mean, beyond me, but obviously it can be figured out.
The CEO of Walmart has 5.
Well, the reason Skinwalker Ranch is such this famous story, and the Pentagon was paying attention to this research. Bigelow brought in a bunch of academics to study all the paranormal activity happening at this location over a decade. I think that was if we're exploring B theory, that was a research done from a legal perspective. They want to see what kind of liability they have for a location after they've done a bunch of UFO shit at it, right? They want us. It was the first time they were like, okay, well, let's long-term study a location. We know our UFOs have been fucking up this ranch for a decade or whatever. So I'm going to buy it and see what kind of long-term effects it has. How long does that paranormal hangover last? And judging by the TV show, it's about up.
Yeah.
Not much
Yeah,
happening
right. It's starting
anymore.
to fucking taper off. It's like they're entering the realm of like, finding Bigfoot, where they're now just fucking walking around and screaming into the ether,
Right.
and they're not seeing anything. But it's got a rich history of like fucking water babies and all kinds of crazy shit going on there.
But exactly,
that
it's one
doesn't
of
seem to
those.
happen.
It's one of those damage control research studies corporations like to do. You always hear about it where like the tobacco companies knew how bad tobacco was for everybody and they covered it up for years. Like they had done the research, discovered, oh shit, this is bad. Well, we can't let people know about it. Bigelow is probably doing a similar thing with UFO research. He was
Wi-Fi.
like, well,
Wi-Fi's next on that list. That's going to be in our
oh
lifetime.
yeah, no,
That's putting
fucking
fucking holes in people's testicles.
microwaves is my one, dude. There's no way you should. I use one. I'm still like every time I'm like, this is killing me. There's no way it's not.
I swear, we got to be being inundated
Small
with shit
doses
left
of
and right.
radiation.
There's times where I'm just walking around throughout the day and I get this like really weird feeling that I'm not like running on all cylinders. Like I feel a little retarded. Like I should be better. And I don't know what it is because I don't I don't do anything crazy. I eat pretty healthy. I work out. Like, why do I feel fucking stupid? And it's because, Wi-Fi and microwaves are just filling our brains with holes. That's got to be it. I'm not willing to accept anything else.
Some places
Cell
I go
phone,
into,
man.
I'll go into like large malls or like a Kohl's, something like that. And you go in there and I immediately feel like I don't know what is going on with the shape of this room or this. I don't know what it is, but it fucking takes energy from me.
All the malls are big domes and shit. You're like, woo.
Yeah.
There's all
got a
kinds of
favorite-
electronics, the fucking phone stores there.
I've got a favorite bit on this. It's I think it's the Internet Historian, and he talks about in one of his videos. He's like, every in a group of rational people, if you say the 5G, any of those conspiracy theories, they're like, oh, that's nonsense. That's crazy. But if you were to hold a Wi-Fi router, say next to an infant's head, the parents would be like, don't do that, please. Well, hold on,
hold it like a gun.
Hold on, I thought we didn't believe in this.
That's a good point. I feel like if you walk into a Verizon store too, like all the salespeople, everybody in a Verizon store seems retarded, and I think it's because they're the closest to their fucking.
They're all just
to their
shuffling
devices.
their feet like
I
this.
use
like a
T-Mobile,
wall
but
of
I
them,
can
dude.
concur.
Yeah, dude,
I've
they're
told
all
this
the worst
story.
Fucked up people.
I'll tell you this story, but I've told it on the show a bunch of times. When they sent out that emergency broadcast sometime in October, something like that, I put my phone. What was that?
October 8th, yeah.
October 8th. I put my phone in a Faraday box, brought my kids outside. We sat on the trampoline. Right above us, the tree started vibrating with cicadas all at the same time. I ran to my house and there was a guy in there doing work. There's a renovation. And I was like, hey, did you hear anything? And his phone goes off. So it was almost like the fucking wave traveled right across, right into the phone. I'm like, yep. They're killing us. There's nothing you can do.
100%. Something's going on.
If the
100%.
crickets reacted to it, it's like, there's something tangible in the air. We just don't know
It's
yet.
funny,
It's not the cell phones. The insects are clearly being harvested for UFOs. All right, we already got here. Come on.
These cicadas are flying. These cicadas are too heavy to fly.
They might be. It's interesting. One of now we've been talking, and I call it B theory, and I like to call it that because it's a little bit of a pun. Because I still am pretty on board with the psychedelic nature of a lot of this phenomenon. But Gorbachev also did heavy research into scarab beetles, and of course that gets really interesting because if his technology works as described, theoretically you could stitch a bunch of scarab beetle wing covers together as well, because any heavy flying insect would have so specifically he discovered this CSE effect, and this is a real effect, the cavity structure effect. Essentially anything that has multiple caverns, like a honeybee comb, lots of insect nests, but he also found these rigid patterns under most insect shells that would give off a CSE effect, and he believed that any of these heavy flying insects would have one of these. And his research into scarab beetles perhaps enlightened that perspective. And if the technology works as described, theoretically, the Egyptians could have stitched a bunch of scarab beetle wing things together, slid it under a giant fucking 12-ton block of stone, and then just had like 4 dudes on each end, just like lift it.
Holding it, yeah, and moving
And like
it the
just
way they
hover it
want.
a few inches above the ground and just float it into place, which, I mean, would make a lot
Whom
of
they
sense.
worship, or they really had a high level of admiration for the scarab beetle. So that's very interesting because you can find its iconography all over the hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
Like, I
It's
just love
specifically
that.
at the pyramid sites as well.
Yeah, like they're showing you, like, yeah, and we fucking use the scarab palette to do it. Everybody knows the scarab palette. We'll just put the fucking, so that way people in the future will know.
Yeah,
Make a fucking scarab palette,
that
dummy. That's how you
or
fucking move big rocks.
I do tend to believe that that bit of it might have been kept in the Egyptian secret schools, because following this train of logic, this history of
How can you control the labor if labor is so effectively done? How do you have a serfdom class if anybody can make
Yeah.
a fucking scarab palette and make whatever the fuck they want? You need to coven, you need to occult these things in order to be able to enslave people. That's fucking interesting. I like
so
that.
where it gets
I mean, I don't like it,
interesting,
but
where it gets interesting is now enter the Freemasons to the equation, where again, moving large stones, cutting stone, floating it around is their fucking dealio. And that becomes part of this cornerstone. And it follows this logic that we kind of lose it slightly over time, because obviously they're not building pyramids anymore, but there's still some kind of understanding to it. Then I like to, this might be a little heretical. Heretical, that was right. Whatever. Don't yell at me, Christians. But if we take the earliest translations of the Bible, Jesus was a Mason. Perhaps he knew how to use fucking bug wing shells to do weird teleportation shit, and that might explain some of that, or float above the water, perhaps.
just had fucking sandals with bug shells underneath them, dude, and he's just skating on the water.
And them crucifying him was more about, hey, you can't tell peasants about this shit.
That's interesting.
More than
Have
it was.
have you collected any fucking scarab wings?
No, I haven't. I should buy some on the internet. I've been doing a lot of research, and they have a top shelf entomology department here in Gainesville. So I'm hoping to talk to somebody about all this crazy shit. I know it's going to be a letdown because they're going to be like, "That's crazy," but it's going to be a good chapter in the book. You got to include it.
I wonder, because you know how people do they'll take like a long pin and they'll pin insects into frames. Since that is a viable hobby, or a widespread
I bet
hobby,
you can buy them on the internet.
I wonder if you could just buy them at fucking Amazon's got like all the recipes to make your own floating palette. They just think you're going to put it in a fucking glass frame.
It's like the kid he was like harvesting radiation through some like kind of like weird clocks. What was that, the nuclear boy? You remember that guy?
Yeah.
No,
He was extracting it.
I was
I was
like, it was a
thinking
watch.
balloon boy.
Yeah,
just
there was like
off.
a clock. This kid's making a fucking nuclear reactor. So, all right, like we have how much time do we have? We got about 15 minutes, and I do want to hear.
Oh, hey, you know what? Yeah, I don't want to like step on toes, but real quick before we end, I am excited about this. We've got our own Nephilim shit out there. I've been working. I worked really hard to get this stuff up and out. So yeah, if you're a fan of the show, yeah, this is fuck the ad read. This is if you're a fan of the show, go check out the merch because it's really cool, really quality stuff, embroidered. I mean, we're doing it right. So yeah, if you like it, go check it out. There's our ad read.
Absolutely, guys. Toplobster.com.
Toplobster.com. I'd be remiss if I didn't say yes. Thank you.
So I want to get into sort of the because I think we're hanging heavily around the tech aspect, and one of the things that you say is pretty interesting to me is this psychedelic aspect, and I wonder in your mind, and I imagine not, does the psychedelic aspect of this entire thing diminish the experience, or do you engage with the idea at all that like just because it's not something that other people can experience at the same time, doesn't make it any less real. Because I'm of the school of thought of a lot of these things that people experience is, that maybe a clinical setting would chalk it up to a psychedelic or a hallucinogenic experience.
Mhm.
And I kind of go the other way from that. And I think that in the same way that like dreams to me are they're very real, just not in the sense that this is, but real doesn't just mean you could touch it and you could see it and you could smell it. I think these things are much more than just nighttime hallucinations, from a
Oh yeah.
androgynous dump of dimethyltryptamine. I think that when you say these experiences are psychedelic in nature as well, these UFO experiences, do you mean to say that that diminishes the reality of the experience, or is this something that they're experiencing in a realm that just isn't this one?
So yeah, I think it doesn't diminish the reality of it. Absolutely. I'm kind of lean towards the perspective of biocentrism, and that's kind of a step beyond simulation theory, which again has its ups and its downs. But I do think is a good step forward in philosophy. The fact that we can say simulation theory and everyone knows, yeah, like a computer game, that's huge. I think it's close. And biocentrism is this idea that the human mind is a cornerstone of reality, or not necessarily the human mind, but biological observance. Without a biological entity to experience reality, reality doesn't occur, not in anywhere close to what it is for us, anyways. And so I think that when we start to look at the paranormal through that lens, I think it explains a lot of this phenomenon, where it can be both a psychedelic hallucination and also be something more, be something that actually physically alters reality as well. And I think that pops up a lot in paranormal cases. I think a lot of ghost hunting and things like that are more akin to tulpa generation than they are to, like, there's an old dead soldier and his spirit still walks these halls. And again,
So is
go
it
ahead.
something on the sort of like the quantum scale, right? Like what's the double slit
Mhm.
test, right? Like the act of
Exactly.
observation
Right.
causes whatever the phenomenon is to happen. But does that
And
mean that the phenomenon is any less real?
right. So the idea there is that these particles, these base units of reality, aren't physical until they're observed. And again, there's a lot of scientists who will explain that better than a paranormal guy will. But that's the gist of it. And that's, again, it's backed up. That seems to be the case with these base units. And so enter the equation of consciousness. What is consciousness? Well, it clearly doesn't occur on anything larger than the particle level, right? Or otherwise, we would have a better grasp of it. We would understand what it is. And so, if those particles can interact with physical particles, which these experiments show, then yeah, I think that you can have a psychedelic experience that is physical, and it can be physical for you and not physical for other people. It can be physical for other people as well. And I think this was something that was actually more akin to a science in the Americas before colonialism. I think the shamanism that we dismiss, it's always baffles me, because everyone knows that these shamans had amazing medicinal cures that they produced from the jungle. And they, even from the get, even the conquistadors recognized that these people were like really great doctors. But then this other weird psychedelic shit, well, that's all just woo nonsense, fake shit. But every anecdotal story, and even going down and talking to people who've been in those communities, reading books about them. I've just finished 2 books about the Amazon. I've been in that headspace for like a month and a half now. But the shaman, even to this day, the few ones that are left will, be able to predict. They'll be like, oh, I'll tell them you're coming, and he'll go into a trance, and then be like, all right, go ahead. And they'll walk, a week and a half and then canoe another 2 days up a river and get to this uncontacted tribe. And they're like, oh yeah, the shaman said you were coming. What's up, guys? And so they had this consistent, and again, it's nonchalant for them because they understand it the same way we understand using a cell phone. Where if you handed that tribal dude, you'd be like, the fuck is this? Like, how does that work? And we kind of accidentally eliminated that science, but the traces of it, I think, are quite revealing. And most of it involves essentially entity work, which is spooky if you're especially really religious. They might get you. But for the most part, these guys are like, nah, they told us like which medicines to use, and like, they would like warn us attacks were coming, and the relationships with entities were much more complex. And I think this is, again, just like the bee theory, this kind of psychic effect was understood by ancient peoples as well in a more practical sense. Even the Greeks would, do crazy rituals and sacrifices and shit to gods, and the effect. And again, even if that's subconscious even if the effect is subconscious as we'd understand it in a biocentric world, that subconscious effect manifests physically because we create our realities to an extent. I like to call it the 11% principle. And I do that because I'm bad at math, and it puts it right where a spot I can understand it. And this comes from a summary written up by Jeffrey Mishlove. But he talks about in his Encyclopedia of Consciousness the telepathy studies that they did throughout the 80s. Everyone remembers those, like, psychic children proven to be real, like, and all those crazy stories. And then they kind of just sputtered out and you never heard about anything ever again about them. Well, there's a really interesting story about why that is. And so essentially, this started with the random number generator experiments. And so this would have a participant sitting there, and you would think even number, even number, even number, even number, even number. And hopefully you'd get an even number on the random number generator. And what they discovered is that they would get more evens than odds, about 11% more than chance. So like 61% of them would be evens at the best case scenario, which is why I like to call it the 11%. The problem was, and they replicated this a bunch of times, and they're like, cool, published it, boom, look at that, psychic shit is real, about 11% on a good day. And obviously, skeptical scientists came in, and they were like, well, we got to fucking disprove this shit. And they ran the exact same experiment, and what they ended up finding was that they started to get odd numbers when the person was thinking even, more than chance. In fact, on a good day, they'd get 11% more odd numbers than they get even numbers. And so what the conclusion after years of debunking, and conducting the experiments from remote locations, the scientists would set it up. No one on one side of this country, the participants wouldn't have any idea what they were doing other than, okay, sit and think about even numbers, sure. And do that on another side, and still, if they were skeptical scientists, they would get more odd numbers. If they were even slightly wanting to prove it, they would get more even numbers. And so the conclusion was, well, whatever psychic effect is at play is affected by the group no matter what, like no matter distance or whatever, our psychic effect is affecting the experiment. And so there's no way you can really look at it further. It's the same problem they're having with the slit experiment where, okay, it doesn't exist unless it's observed. We're observers. Where do we go from here? How can we explore that without being a part of the experiment? And that's where quantum computing comes in, which I can't even begin to even touch any of that shit. But computers maybe is the answer.
That experiment, right? Doesn't that kind of just prove that it is true though? Because everybody in one group wants it to be disproven. And so by virtue of that, there's a group of scientists with a vested interest in odds coming up, and then
Mhm.
there's your 11%. And then of course there's a group that thinks this is intriguing and wants to delve further into it, and so
Mhm.
they are excited about the idea of more evens coming up, and so now there's a group of scientists that are all sort of aiming at that. So just by virtue of that, doesn't it mean that it is true? It's
Well,
just strange. Like,
it's strange, and I think it's one of those things where it's still just an uncomfortable subject because I think all we kind of know that to be true as human beings. Any athlete will talk about the flow state where they hit that they're just hitting every ball, they're catching every pass, they're just hitting it, the best game of their lives. They hit that 11%. And I'm sure if you did anything and you were normally great at and then suddenly got an 11% boost at, you'd feel like fucking Superman. You know what I mean? But it's also just 11%. And so it's not enough to like really warrant scientists breaking their back over researching it. You know what I mean? It would be one thing if they discovered, like, doing the experiment, everyone believes in it, everyone's focused, everyone believes in even, and they got 100% evens. No, even then it's still 11% evens at the best. It caps. And so that kind of effect, it's again one of those things where I think about the Battle of Troy, where the fucking Greek emperor or whatever sacrificed his daughter before they sailed over to Greece just to make sure they were, sailing safe and that they'd win the battle. And also it shows your troops that I ain't fucking around. We're doing this for real. It gives you that 11%. It gives you an 11% battle boost. And in ancient times, you're fighting with swords and shit. That's huge. But if you're like a dude, like if you got a samurai sword and you're like 11%, I'm feeling it, I've hit the flow state, you're still not beating the machine gun. You know what I mean? There has been a surpassing of this ESP science by technology. Even the things we talk about, the shamans doing in the Amazon, besides controlling jaguars and animals and shit, most of it can be replicated with like technology, cell phones and shit like that. You know what I mean?
What are they doing with the ESP of like the larger community when you do a false flag? Or when you do
that's
an event
where these things get interesting, is where, okay, we know that there is an effect. What would people be willing to do to harvest that 11%? Because, if we're all firing our nukes at the same time, you better hope 11% of yours hit more than the enemies. And so who knows? But I also, just from personal experience, firmly believe that no kind of quantum network of human beings is meant to be 300 million strong, let alone like a billion strong. And that's why you end up having things like elite power structures, because these guys, they fall into the same neural network. They fall into the same, they think the same way.
So
they
they
are
can pull
attracted
it
to
off.
each other. Yeah, it's tribalism, but we've created these bizarre invisible boundaries that lie somewhere between class and race and religion and every other place. That's where the boundaries are now. They're not,
but
where they used to be.
the
Which was my forest,
11%,
your forest.
right? So the 11% mixed with controlling all the money and printing it ad nauseum, devaluing the currency, sacrificing children to gain Moloch's favor. There's a lot
Well,
of
that would be
different
the
things you could do.
11%. If they're doing
Oh,
it, that's what it's for.
that one's got to be a boost, because I think if we all got together and we were like, we want to be 11% faster in a foot race, we might be able to pull that off. But if we threw a couple of kids into a fire, at the base of a giant golden bull, I feel like if that doesn't give you an extra like 11% on top of it, I don't know what the hell they're doing. That
Well,
doesn't
you
make
gotta
any sense.
really believe in it. That's the kicker, because it could have the
That's it.
opposite effect. If you're like, this is bullshit, then it's just
If
a
anybody's
bummer.
doubting, oh man, if anybody in the group doubts and Moloch's just like, nope, fucking take an 11%, bitch.
Yeah, man. That's why Hillary wasn't.
That is true. That's why you
president.
got to get in that. You got to get in that coffin, and you got to get fucked by 100 men. Yeah,
Let your
you gotta
dad turn
mean
off
it.
on top of you.
Yeah, or 95, but definitely not 0.
Definitely more than one, less than 100, possibly 195.
You gotta get masturbated on, doused in semen. All right, Chaz, this has been fucking awesome. Before we wrap up, can you please let everyone know one more time where to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Find me at Chaz of the Dead on all the social medias, chazofthedead.com, and then check out paranormalitymag.com, where you can find all kinds of high strangeness, paranormal craziness, UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, everything in between, and all the weird creators and people that make it happen. So yeah, if you like strange stuff, go check that out. And thanks for having me on, guys. This was a blast. We'll have to do it again soon.
Hell yeah, man. Thanks, guys. Yo, we'll see you tomorrow. We have a very special guest, not an expert in the field. Gonna remain anonymous. Has a story to tell us about entities. So I'm hoping he shows up. This is a very interesting guy. Love his Twitter. I can't say who he is. Show up tomorrow at 3:30. I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen, but I'll see you later. Peace out.
Tell him I say they're generated by humans. See what he says. I'm
gonna tell him that
he's gonna disavow me. Watch this. Don't tell him I said this, but he's gonna say I'm crazy and possessed, probably.
I'm gonna tell him that everything he's experiencing is bug wings. All
Listeners, you owe me $1 if I'm right.
All right, guys. Oh, don't forget to go to toplobster.com. Peace.
Peace out.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real. If you can persuade people that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see, you got them. Because they'll laugh in the face of an explanation that portrays the bigger picture of what's happening.